Historically, it has shown that people are yet to realize that money is not just about buying things. It's the invisible force that determined which civilizations would dominate the ancient world and which would crumble into dust. It's the reason some empires stretched across continents while others collapsed overnight. And the pattern repeats throughout history with an almost eerie consistency. Today, we're going to follow the thread of money through 5,000 years of human history. We'll watch it create the greatest empire the world had ever seen. We'll see how the lack of it brought mighty kingdoms to their knees. And we'll discover that the rise and fall of civilizations follows a pattern so predictable. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is the story of how money shaped everything. Look at this. Someone, somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia, had a revolutionary idea. What if instead of trading chickens for grain, you could trade something everyone wanted? Something small, portable, and universally valuable? The first money wasn't coins. It was grain itself, stored in temple warehouses. The priest would give you a clay tablet, a receipt, essentially, that said you had grain in storage. You could trade that tablet. Suddenly, our farmer didn't need to find someone who wanted chickens right now. He could sell his chickens, get a receipt, and use it whenever he needed. Simple, right? But here's where it gets interesting. The civilization that figured this out first, the Sumerians, didn't just become wealthy. They became powerful because money did something nobody expected. It created specialists. Before money, if you wanted to eat, you had a farm. Period. But with money, a skilled craftsman could spend all day making pottery or tools or jewelry, sell them, and buy food with the proceeds. The best potters became full-time potters. The best builders became full-time builders. The best warriors became full-time warriors. Suddenly, Sumer had professional armies, master craftsmen, and dedicated priests. Their cities grew. Their temples reached toward the sky. They invented writing to keep track of all these transactions. They developed laws. They created bureaucracy, all because of money. And here's the crucial part. Their neighbors, who were still trading chickens for grain, didn't stand a chance. When Sumer went to war, they brought professional soldiers with professional weapons made by professional smiths. It was like bringing a tank to a knife fight. Money had created the world's first superpower. Fast forward 1,000 years. A new civilization is rising in a place that seems completely inhospitable. The deserts and mountains of Lydia in what's now Turkey. Around 600 BCE, the Lydians did something no one had ever done before. They invented coins. Now, you might be thinking, so what? People already had money. But here's what made coins revolutionary. They were standardized. Every coin of the same type weighed exactly the same and was worth exactly the same. You didn't need to weigh them or test them or verify them. The king's stamp guaranteed their value. This changed everything. A merchant in Lydia could now trade with someone 1,000 miles away, someone they'd never met, someone who spoke a different language, and trust the transaction completely. Coins didn't just make trade easier. They made long-distance trade possible on a scale never before imagined. The Lydian king, Croesus, became so wealthy that his name became synonymous with riches. Rich as Croesus, people still say today, 2,600 years later. But then something happened that would set the pattern for the next 3,000 years of history. The Persians invaded. Now, here's where the story gets fascinating. The Persians didn't just conquer Lydia and take their gold. They took their idea. They adopted coinage and spread it throughout their massive empire. And this is the key insight. The Persians understood that money wasn't just wealth. It was infrastructure. They built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway system connecting their empire. They established the first postal system. They created a standardized currency that worked from India to Egypt. And with this infrastructure, they built an empire that lasted for 2 centuries and stretched across 3 continents. The Persians discovered the first great truth about money and civilization. Whoever controls the flow of money controls everything. Their tax collectors reached into every corner of the empire. Their coins became the standard from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. Local kingdoms could keep their customs, their languages, their religions, but they had to use Persian money. And that meant they were part of the Persian system, whether they liked it or not. Money had become a chain connecting millions of people across thousands of miles. A golden chain? Yes, but a chain nonetheless. But the Persians made a mistake. They let their infrastructure decay. They let their currency debase. They took their golden chain for granted. And then Rome appeared. Rome understood money in a way no civilization had before. They turned it into a weapon. In 211 BCE, Rome introduced the denarius, a silver coin that would become the most successful currency in human history. For over 400 years, the denarius held its value. Soldiers received it as pay, merchants used it for trade, and citizens trusted it completely. But Rome did something brilliant with their money. They tied it directly to military expansion. Here's how it worked. Rome would conquer new territory. They'd extract silver and gold through mines and plunder. They'd mint coins with this precious metal. Then they'd use those coins to pay soldiers who'd spend them in newly conquered territories, integrating those regions into the Roman economy. Those territories would then pay taxes back to Rome in Roman coins, which Rome would use to fund more conquest. It was a perpetual motion machine of empire building. And with this system, Rome grew from a single city to an empire of 65 million people stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. At its height, all roads quite literally led to Rome, and all those roads carried Roman coins. The denarius became so trusted that people in India and China used it, even though they'd never seen Rome. It was the world's first global currency. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Remember how we said the denarius held its value for 400 years? Around 200 CE, Roman emperors started facing a problem. The empire had stopped expanding. No new conquests meant no new sources of silver and gold. But the empire still needed money to pay soldiers, build roads, and maintain infrastructure. So emperors started doing something clever. Or at least, they thought it was clever. They began adding less silver to each coin. A denarius that was once 95% silver slowly became 90% silver, then 80%, then 50%. The coins looked the same, but they weren't. This is called debasement. At first, nobody noticed, but slowly prices started rising. If coins were worth less, you needed more coins to buy the same things. By 300 CE, the denarius was barely 5% silver. Prices had increased by 1,000%. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything costs 10 times more than it did last year. Your savings are worthless. Your salary can't buy food. That's what Romans experienced. And here's what happened next. People stopped trusting the money. If you couldn't trust money, you couldn't trust trade. If you couldn't trust trade, cities couldn't get food. If cities couldn't get food, people fled to the countryside. If people fled cities, there were no tax revenues. If there were no tax revenues, there was no army. If there was no army, there was no defense. The Roman Empire didn't fall because of barbarian invasions. The barbarian invasions succeeded because Rome's monetary system had already collapsed from within. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire was gone. The denarius, once the most trusted currency on earth, was worthless metal. Money had raised Rome to unimaginable heights, and the corruption of that same money brought it crashing down. After Rome fell, Western Europe plunged into what we call the Dark Ages. But here's something interesting. They weren't dark everywhere. And the places that weren't dark had something in common. They had working money systems. In the Byzantine Empire, the successor to Rome's eastern territories, the gold solidus remained stable for over 700 years. While Western Europe descended into chaos, Constantinople thrived. Their money worked, so their civilization worked. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, the gold dinar and silver dirham created an economic zone stretching from Spain to Indonesia. Baghdad became the richest city on earth. Islamic scholars preserved Greek and Roman knowledge, advanced mathematics, and pioneered chemistry and medicine. Why? Because their money was sound. Trust in currency meant trust in trade. Trust in trade meant wealth. Wealth meant leisure time for scholars and artists. And that meant civilization flourished. But Western Europe? They'd forgotten how to make money work. Most people in medieval Europe never used coins. They lived their entire lives in a barter economy, just like those ancient Mesopotamian farmers. Without money, they couldn't create specialists. Without specialists, they couldn't advance. Villages remained isolated. Innovation stalled. For 500 years, European civilization barely progressed. But then, something changed. Around 1200 CE, Italian merchants rediscovered something the Romans knew. Long-distance trade requires trusted money. Cities like Venice, Genoa, and Florence began minting new coins. They created banks to handle these coins. They invented bills of exchange so merchants didn't have to carry heavy gold across dangerous roads. They reinvented money. And in doing so, they reinvented civilization. The Renaissance didn't begin with artists and philosophers. It began with bankers and coins. The Medici family of Florence became so wealthy through banking that they literally paid for the Renaissance. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, all funded by banking money. Because money had returned, specialists could exist again. Full-time artists, full-time scientists, full-time philosophers. Cities grew. Trade expanded. Knowledge exploded. Europe had learned Rome's lesson. Sound money builds civilizations. But they were about to learn Rome's other lesson. Corrupted money destroys them. In 1492, Christopher Columbus stumbled onto the Americas. Spain hit the jackpot. They found mountains of silver in Mexico and Bolivia, more silver than existed in all of Europe. Between 1500 and 1800, Spanish ships carried back 150,000 tons of silver. Spain became the richest nation on Earth overnight. The Spanish Empire stretched across the globe. They called their king the ruler of the empire on which the sun never sets. With infinite silver, Spain could do anything. They built magnificent cathedrals. They funded the largest military in the world. They fought wars across 3 continents simultaneously. Spanish kings lived in palaces that made Rome's emperors look modest. But here's the thing about having infinite money. You stop worrying about how you spend it. Spain imported everything. Food from Sicily, weapons from the Netherlands, cloth from England, ships from Genoa. Even though they had all that silver, they didn't build industries. Why bother making things when you could just buy them? And then something strange happened. All that silver started causing problems. When silver flooded into Spain, there was suddenly way more money chasing the same amount of goods. Prices exploded. The same thing happened that happened to Rome, inflation. But worse, because the silver kept coming and coming. Spanish workers demanded higher wages to keep up with rising prices. But manufacturers in other countries didn't face the same inflation. So Spanish goods became expensive and imports became cheaper. This killed what little industry Spain had. Meanwhile, all that silver Spain spent on imports ended up in other countries. The Netherlands, England, and France used Spanish silver to build their own industries. They created manufacturing centers. They developed new technologies. They built trading companies. Spain had the gold mine, but everyone else got rich from it. By 1650, Spain was in crisis. Despite more silver than ever, the government was bankrupt. They'd borrowed massive amounts of money, assuming infinite silver would last forever. But the mines were running out, and the borrowed money was due. Spain defaulted on their debts in 1557, 1560, 1575, 1596, 1607, 1627, 1647, and 1680. Think about that. The richest country in the world, with literal mountains of silver, went bankrupt 8 times in barely a century. How? Because they learned the hard way. Wealth isn't about having money. It's about what you do with it. Spain extracted wealth, but created nothing. Their rivals took Spanish silver and built industries, universities, and trading networks. They invested in the future. Spain spent on the present. By 1700, Spain had gone from the world's superpower to a second-rate nation. Their silver was gone. Their industries never existed. Their empire was crumbling. Money had made Spain the richest nation on earth. But misunderstanding money destroyed them. Britain watched Spain's tragedy and learned the opposite lesson. When Britain discovered they couldn't compete with Spanish silver, they didn't try to find their own mountains of gold. Instead, they did something smarter. They created a new kind of money, credit. In 1694, Britain established the Bank of England, the world's first modern central bank. Here's what made it revolutionary. The bank could issue paper money backed, not by gold in a vault, but by the government's promise to pay. Wait, you might be thinking, money backed by a promise? That sounds like a scam. But here's why it worked. That promise was backed by Britain's tax revenues. And those tax revenues came from a growing economy of trade and industry. As long as the economy grew, the promise was good. And as long as the promise was good, people trusted the money. This system had a massive advantage. Spain's wealth was limited by how much silver they could dig up. Britain's wealth was limited only by how much their economy could grow. And a growing economy is theoretically infinite. Britain used this system to outcompete everyone. They borrowed money to build ships. Those ships increased trade. Increased trade grew the economy. A growing economy meant they could borrow more money. More money meant more ships. More ships meant more trade. It was Spain's system in reverse. Instead of extracting wealth and spending it, Britain was creating wealth and investing it. By 1800, Britain had built an empire larger than Rome's. They controlled a quarter of the world's population and landmass. But unlike Rome or Spain, Britain's wealth wasn't in vaults. It was in factories, ships, banks, and trading networks. Money had evolved again. It was no longer just coins or promises. It was the system itself, a web of banks, credit, investments, and trade that connected the entire world. And here's the crucial part. This system required trust more than ever before. Gold is gold. You can touch it, weigh it, verify it. But credit? Credit is just a shared belief that tomorrow will come, that debts will be paid, that the system will continue. Britain had created the most powerful economic system in history, but they'd also created the most fragile one. Britain watched Spain's tragedy and learned the opposite lesson. When Britain discovered they couldn't compete with Spanish silver, they didn't try to find their own mountains of gold. Instead, they did something smarter. They created a new kind of money, credit. In 1694, Britain established the Bank of England, the world's first modern central bank. Here's what made it revolutionary. The bank could issue paper money backed, not by gold in a vault, but by the government's promise to pay. Wait, you might be thinking, money backed by a promise? That sounds like a scam. But here's why it worked. That promise was backed by Britain's tax revenues. And those tax revenues came from a growing economy of trade and industry. As long as the economy grew, the promise was good. And as long as the promise was good, people trusted the money. This system had a massive advantage. Spain's wealth was limited by how much silver they could dig up. Britain's wealth was limited only by how much their economy could grow. And a growing economy is theoretically infinite. Britain used this system to outcompete everyone. They borrowed money to build ships. Those ships increased trade. Increased trade grew the economy. A growing economy meant they could borrow more money. More money meant more ships. More ships meant more trade. It was Spain's system in reverse. Instead of extracting wealth and spending it, Britain was creating wealth and investing it. By 1800, Britain had built an empire larger than Rome's. They controlled a quarter of the world's population and landmass. But unlike Rome or Spain, Britain's wealth wasn't in vaults. It was in factories, ships, banks, and trading networks. Money had evolved again. It was no longer just coins or promises. It was the system itself, a web of banks, credit, investments, and trade that connected the entire world. And here's the crucial part. This system required trust more than ever before. Gold is gold. You can touch it, weigh it, verify it. But credit? Credit is just a shared belief that tomorrow will come, that debts will be paid, that the system will continue. Britain had created the most powerful economic system in history, but they'd also created the most fragile one. So let's step back and look at the pattern we've been following for 5,000 years. First, a civilization figures out how to make money work. They standardize it, stabilize it, make it trustworthy. Sumer with grain receipts, Lydia with coins, Rome with the denarius, medieval Italy with banking, Britain with credit, America with the dollar. Second, That working money system allows for specialization, trade, and growth. Professional soldiers, artists, engineers, and scientists emerge. Cities grow. Technology advances. The civilization becomes wealthy and powerful. Third, that civilization becomes dominant. They spread their money system to neighbors through trade or conquest. The Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the American dollar. Fourth, the very success that made them powerful makes them complacent. They start taking the money system for granted. Rome debases their coins. Spain wastes their silver. Germany prints unlimited money. Fifth, the money system breaks. And when the money system breaks, everything else breaks. Trade collapses. Cities empty. The empire fragments. Rome falls. Spain declines. Germany hyperinflates. The pattern is so consistent, it's almost mathematical. Money builds civilizations. Corrupted money destroys them. But here's what makes our era different. We're all connected now. When Sumer fell, the rest of the world barely noticed. When Rome fell, it was a regional catastrophe. When Spain declined, Europe adapted. But today, we have one global money system. If it breaks, there's no isolated collapse. It's everyone, everywhere, all at once. That's simultaneously the greatest achievement and the greatest vulnerability of our civilization. We started this journey with a frustrated farmer in ancient Mesopotamia, struggling to trade his chickens for grain. That simple problem led to the invention that built and destroyed empires across 5,000 years of human history. Money gave us professional armies and professional artists. It gave us cities and universities. It gave us global trade and instant communication. It lifted billions from poverty and connected civilizations across continents and oceans. But money also brought us Rome's collapse and Spain's bankruptcy. It brought us Germany's hyperinflation and dozens of financial crises. Every monetary system in history has eventually failed. Every single one. The Sumerians' clay tablets, the Lydians' coins, the Roman denarius, the Spanish silver, the British pound. They all had their day. They all seemed permanent. They all ended. Which brings us to today's uncomfortable question. Is our current money system different? Have we finally figured it out? Or are we just in the middle of another cycle? Too close to see the pattern? We're living through the most complex, most sophisticated, most global monetary system ever created. It's given us unprecedented prosperity and connected 8 billion people in a single economic web. But it's also more abstract than ever before. It's based purely on trust, on collective belief, on nothing but our shared agreement that these numbers in computers represent real value. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we've finally transcended the old pattern. Maybe modern technology, global cooperation, and economic understanding have made money truly stable for the first time in history. Or maybe we're just setting ourselves up for the biggest collapse yet. Standing here in 2025, we can't know which it is. Future historians will look back at our era with perfect clarity, the same way we look back at Rome or Spain. They'll see patterns we can't see. They'll understand mistakes we haven't realized we're making. But they'll be using the same lens we've used today, the lens of money. Because money isn't just about buying things. It never was. Money is how civilizations keep score. It's how we coordinate millions of strangers to work together. It's how we store value across time and transfer it across space. It's the invisible architecture that holds civilization together. And throughout all of human history, one truth has remained constant. When money works, civilization flourishes. When money fails, civilization falls. The question isn't whether our money system will eventually change. History tells us it will. The question is, will it evolve peacefully into something new, or will it collapse catastrophically like so many before it? That farmer in ancient Mesopotamia couldn't have imagined the world his simple invention would create. He just wanted to trade his chickens. And we can't imagine the world our money system is creating right now. We're too close to it, too inside it, too dependent on it to see it clearly. But 5,000 years of history whispers a warning. Every civilization that ignored the health of its money system collapsed. Every civilization that thought their money was too big to fail learned otherwise. Every civilization believed they were different. None of them were. The rise and fall of civilizations has always followed the rise and fall of money. That pattern hasn't changed in 5,000 years. The only question that matters is, will we be the exception